leave these on. Hello, Taylor Elwood here with Magical Experiments Podcast. And today I am excited because not only do I have an amazing guest on, Rothi Apkullu, who is going to introduce himself momentarily, but for the first time ever, I am doing this live on Substack. So this is going to be a different type of podcast because you're going to actually see it as it's occurring. All right, Rothi, please introduce yourself and let me know if I said your name correctly, or feel free to correct me on that. But go ahead and tell us who you are and what you do.
Rothi Apkullu. Apkullu is a title for the Sumerian high priests that were appointed by Lord Enki and serve the purpose of sharing hidden knowledge with humanity.
Okay, perfect. And, we were talking for a couple moments before we got on here, and what you told me is that you consider yourself a creationist magician. What is a creationist magician? Tell me a little bit about that, because I don't think that's a term most people are familiar with.
I'm not even sure it is a term. I think it's just something that I came up with. But
well,
I
that's
see
where all
it
terms
as
start, right? Someone comes up with them. So there you go. Own it, brother.
everything started as an idea, right?
That's right.
What I do is I take the arcane and occult knowledge primarily from the Sumerian pantheon and I reconstruct their rituals utilizing more evolved practices that developed over time through the ritual arts.
Okay, so for example, you have like a ritual, we'll just say 3 or 4,000 years old, and what you're doing is you're modernizing it with the ritual practices that have occurred in between then, and as a result being able to share that with people so that they can adapt their own practice around that. Would that be accurate?
That would be fairly accurate. As an example, a lot of the original rituals dating back that far, they did not cast a circle and things like that. They might have called the 4 watchtowers, but that was the most they would do. And I go through the whole process of calling at least the 7 watchtowers. If I'm working with a higher force, what I do is I call all 10 watchtowers in and I create a Merkaba basically with the 2 opposing triangles for the 3 higher gods, the 3 lower gods, and then the 4 forces of nature, earth, air, fire, and water in the center, using the 10 planetary forces as the reference point.
Right. And back in ancient times, they wouldn't have known about the 10 planetary forces. They would have known about some of them,
They
but not all
still
of them.
had the 10 planetary forces in Sumeria, but it was a much more simplistic practice. Well, that's actually incorrect. It was very evolved and complex. There are, for example, the Maklu ritual is a purification ritual and a cleansing ritual that takes care of when you have a known adversary that's attacking you. If you have someone that's casting spells on you and whatever, and you know who it is. There are over 15 parts to this ritual. The procedures for just preparing the materials for it takes at least 2 to 3 weeks, and this is not just casual experience. This is 2 to 3 weeks of practically working a full-time job just to create the materials for this ritual. And the ritual itself is between 8 and 11 hours long for all the components of it.
Wow. Well, and really, I mean, that's kind of like a lot of that's kind of different from a lot of contemporary magical work, where it's kind of like people
Very different.
try to do it as quickly as
Especially
possible.
contemporary now, where everybody's doing chaos magic, which is basically just set your intention and release it. Boom, end of spell.
Right. Now I do a lot of what I would call long-term magic, which is where it is magic done over a protracted period of time, and I found a lot of value in that because of how it builds the energy up and it builds the participation and the presence and the focus. So I fully see why you would take that approach.
Yes.
And I think that at the same time, there are a lot of people who don't understand that. So I want to kind of get back to the Sumerian magic, but first I want to kind of touch on that first. So in your experience, because you've obviously been doing this, how long have you been practicing this type of magic? And what has been your experience around taking a long-term scale approach and integrating that kind of focus and awareness toward the magic that you're working?
I've always been dedicated to the spiritual arts and the ritual arts, esoteric and occult knowledge. I've been reading, studying, and practicing since I've been able to read, and was adopted into the Ojibwa tribe to work with spirits, to do dream travel, to do various spirit related energies and things like that from the native perspective. When I was in my early teens, I've been an active member of several occult orders and was recruited by several others, which I said no to because I just wasn't feeling that it was what I was needed. And it's one of those things where it's like, if they're reaching out to me and I'm not looking for them, they're obviously looking for something from me. And
I can appreciate
I
that.
know,
I've had multiple occult organizations reach out, and I've never really joined any of them for similar reasons. So I get it.
and the few that I did like do a trial membership in and like sit in on and whatever, I sat in on it and I'm like, I should be teaching here, not the student. I clearly have done more studies than every other person here. And that's not from a place of ego, that's from a place of reality. I mean, right now my life is 24/7, 365 dedicated to the ritual arts.
Well, there is something very different when somebody is dedicated and focused their time on magic and makes it an integral part of their lives. I mean, I get that because for me, it's a lived practice. It's not just something I do
Yes,
on a
it's not
Friday night
just like
because
showing up at church on Sundays.
yeah, there's no Sunday morning magic here, or
Yes.
or what I call high holiday magic sometimes, where it's like, oh, I'm just gonna whip it out during the holidays, you know.
I
So I get
think
it.
dedication and commitment is a big aspect that's missing from a lot of spiritual practices,
Mhm.
especially those who do mediumship, channeling, working, looking to work with spirits, working to connect to their spirit guides and things like that. If you do not take the time to establish a connection with them and establish a rapport with them and build trust with them, how can you expect them to provide results? This is the same as all these people that are doing prayers on Sunday in church and wondering why Jesus doesn't answer their prayers when they're not committing to the practice at all. They're not having any faith in the process.
Right. Well, and I mean, I take a similar approach to spirit work in that I believe in building long term relationships. That's how it's pretty much always been, and I don't apply the coercive model that we see in a lot of, particularly in the grimoire traditions, because I don't really find that to
Oh,
be
yes.
ever workable. So, one thing I want to note is we have one person at least who's watching us live, and hello to that person. And I want to invite anyone who does happen to be watching this live to feel free to drop questions in. I'll happily ask them, or we'll comment on them together because I think that's this is kind of a
I'm
nice
happy to
feature.
go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I am too. So one of the things that I've done a bit of work around Sumerian um, magic myself, and I would say like a lot of my interest has been around like the mythology, particularly from a sacred masculine perspective, the mythology of Gilgamesh, for example, and
Yeah.
exploring that, but then also exploring like the mysteries of Inanna, and or kind of exploring that interesting place. Who are the primary spirits that you work with in your
The
work, and
primary spirit that I work with is my guardian spirit, and it is not Sumerian, but it is Abaddon.
okay.
Abaddon is highly misunderstood, and well, as pretty much anyone powerful is. And Abaddon is, for those that don't know, the angel of the abyss. Still qualified as an angel, has full dominion and reign over the divine, the infernal, and the tangible plane. The reason for that is in his angelic form, he was Archangel Muriel before he went down to the Abaddon, to the abyss. And when God asked the angels to create Adam, Muriel, aka Abaddon, was the only angel that was able to gather the soil from the four corners of the earth. As a reward for that, God gave Muriel or Abaddon the command over the heaven, the infernal plane, and the tangible plane.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds pretty close to God, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, yeah, there's definitely something going on there. No,
And
and I
since I've
appreciate
been
that.
working with him, the results I've had in the spells and rituals I've been doing have been incredibly effective and extremely quick. On average, when I have something that's brought to me, give an example of one of the things that I had happen fairly recently. Usually 18 to 24 hours, I see concrete results.
Mm-hmm. No, I can.
And
Hmm.
go ahead.
I can appreciate that. I mean, I have a similar relationship with Saturn. You know,
Yeah.
both the planetary force and like the Titan, the energy, and I find that when I do that work with Saturn, it does bring in very quick results when I need it to, and when it doesn't, it's usually there's a good reason, and that's because there's a timing aspect, and of course there's a time component to Saturn, so that makes sense to me.
Yes. Saturn, aka Kronos, beforehand.
Yeah. So where, like within your, how did you discover or get into the Sumerian aspects of the magical practice that
I've
you got
always
into?
been digging down the rabbit hole to get as far back as I could, and I came to the realization that the Sumerian is the first culture that we have documented writings of. It is something that a lot of their information is still being unearthed and translated. The tomb of Hammurabi was only found in the 1970s. That many of the texts have been translated. Some of them are completely random, like a shopping list or grocery list. Some of them, a lot of them, are prayers, rituals, things like that, that are dedicated to the high magic, and specifically a ritual that is called the Ladder of Lights, which is what I do as an initiation for those who seek to work the Sumerian pantheon. And what the Ladder of Lights was originally is you would go through the seven planetary forces, each one for one calendar month, being one moon cycle. And you would do an initiation ritual to invite them in, and then you would pray to them morning, high noon, and sunset every day for that 28-day period, and work through the entire seven planets. And then I added to it, this is the revisionist aspect, I added to it the aspect of then working with the three higher forces. Because originally they worked with all 10. But when Marduk came in, Marduk was considered the emissary and considered the communicator to connect with the higher realms. So they dropped the whole pantheon of the supernal trinity, they called it, that being the sun, the divine masculine, and the divine feminine aspect, and they just went with Marduk as a mediator. They do have the prayers to the three higher gods still available that were in the tomb. And I use the actual original prayers in the Sumerian language in the initiation and the rituals.
Mm-hmm. Now, with Sumerian language, I mean, this is essentially a dead language. So when you're speaking this language, are you basically guessing at how it sounds, or what's your process around
No, they have actually translated the language. There is actually a library in Chicago
that? Okay.
that is in a college that has translated over 17 volumes in an encyclopedia, going over 100 years to actually create this encyclopedia. And they've actually translated thousands and thousands of words of the text.
So you're not actually speaking it in the original Sumerian. You're speaking it in English because of the translation. Then.
I'm speaking a phonetic pronunciation.
Oh, okay, a phonetic pronunciation. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I was just curious about that because I mean I think that's really interesting.
They are translated as well, and there is the option of doing it in English, but in ancient rituals, especially, I prefer that people go with things that are more powerful than the English language. Let's be honest. The English language is very deceptive, very manipulative, very divisive. There's a lot of words that are originally traps in spelling. And if you're using Latin, Greek, Sumerian, Egyptian, Etruscan, any of the ancient languages, Hebrew, whatever, you're going to have a more powerful language and as a result, more power behind your spells than if you are just using the English language.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think you know a lot of times you know it kind of comes down to what I call the convenience trap. Like it's really
Oh,
convenient
yeah.
to do something a certain way, and it seems like a shortcut, but it actually creates what I would call needless complexity in magic. And there's something to
Yeah.
be said for really as best as possible learning a practice as close to the roots as you can. And of course, this
Yeah.
involves a lot of research. I mean, there's
Yeah.
you know something that I've been familiar with in my various interactions is like working, for example, with people around like kind of who are reconstructionists who do the best they can to reconstruct the original context and then
Yeah.
practice in that context. And I really respect that because there is something to be said for the power and the effort that's put into that. And it seems like on the surface, some people would say, well, Taylor, doesn't that seem needlessly complex? And I'd be like, well, no, it's not. Needless complexity is where, in my opinion, is where we take something and we make it more complicated than it needs to be because what we're trying to do is we either don't understand what we're doing. There's that aspect. And I see this a lot with people where they'll do magic where they don't fully understand everything they're doing.
Every single ritual for the Order of the Golden Dawn.
Yeah, right. No, and I say that with the fact that I actually went through and learned those rituals and did those as like a teenager,
That
and
is the
did it for a
perfect
little while. And
example
was
of
like,
needless complexity.
yeah, that was exactly what I discovered, and this kind of seems to be for a lot of people. That's been kind of the commentary that I've got when I talked about it. So there's that aspect, but then the other aspect I think sometimes is that it is that shortcut of quote unquote convenience. And so
Yeah,
then what ends up happening is that people will take that convenience of like we'll say the English language and use that and then what they're doing is they don't realize that they're actually operating out of context. Like you said, for reasons about like
exactly.
limited
Because
language. Yeah.
oftentimes the original words will not have a direct translation or will have a slightly different meaning.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's
Even
just
when they translated the Bible, there were thousands of cases of that. They singularized the term God. Originally, God in the Bible in the original language was a plural form.
yeah, and well we see the result of that, don't we?
Every day.
Yeah, no, and I mean I think in general, like with magical practice, this is kind of where it's important to really develop a good foundation. You know,
Whatever your foundation is, I don't care if it's witchcraft, I don't care if it's paganism, I don't care if you're creating something completely out of nothing. What is important is that you decide what your path is going to be and you stay committed to it. You decide what forces and spirits you're going to work with and you stay committed to them, etc. So that you establish a rapport, establish a familiarity, and build up the energy of your rituals through repeating them multiple times.
yep, yep, that's what I do. I call that iterative magic. Like I have a daily magical practice, a ritual that I do every single day,
Yeah,
and it's something that I do, and that I've been doing that since 2017. And that power of that ritual, because what I'm doing is I'm tapping into every single moment that I've done that ritual. So every time I do it, I'm tapping into all the past moments and I'm tapping into all the future moments as well and combining them and then expanding them outward. I mean, this is the power of iterative magic, where what we're doing is we are imprinting that particular path work. And then what I find is interesting is that when I do magic inside of that container, like I do a magical working, the results become very become like you said, they come a lot quicker. And a large part of that is because what I'm doing is I'm working within that structure already. So one
Exactly.
so one of the things you talked about as a creationist with me briefly at the beginning is is again applying like some of like the changes in magical techniques and practices. And I'm kind of curious, do you ever integrate non-occult disciplines into your magical work? And if so, how?
I definitely feel like I do, even on some subconscious level. Psychology definitely plays a big role into it. The power of the mind, the power of your beliefs, your thought, your words, things like that. Those are not necessarily occult practices, but they are very, very powerful and significant. Even just how you speak and how you project your voice has a tremendous effect in the potential impact it has. There's a lot of I tend to be subconsciously at least mindful of like body language and things like that that are not occult practices, but I will ritualize the concept and I will do things like if I have a theme or a dagger, I will exaggerate my hand movements and things like that just to extend and almost superimpose more energy on them.
That kind of that reminds me a little bit of like 19th century rhetorical practices. So
Yeah.
back in the day, I was pursuing a doctorate in literacy, rhetoric, and social practice. And one of the things I ended up
Yep.
learning about was 19th century rhetoric. And with 19th century rhetoric, for those of you who are coming on here or watching this later on, what that involved is that you would do this very like dramatic gestures. You would do certain practices. You would have certain ways that you stood, like your posture, everything like that. What was interesting is that there was a magician called Pascal Beverly Randolph, who actually wrote about this in his book Sexual Magic. That's what the title was, even though it wasn't just about sex magic. It was about a lot of other things too. But that was the title he used, I guess, because he knew that that was going to be what was going to get people to read it. So even back then, like 19th century, of course, they gave you a
Even back
crazy
then, they do
title.
marketing, they do keywords.
That's right. They knew keywords. So just so y'all know, this isn't anything. This isn't all that new. But it was fascinating to me because he was talking about like posism and like hypnotism and things like that. So I think it is interesting that we can integrate different practices along those lines. And before I go to my next question, we've had a few people join us live, and welcome to all of you. If you want to drop a question in, we are talking about ancient magic and modern experimentation. If you have any questions for me or for Rothi, please ask. This is the first time we're doing this live, so I think it's kind of a fun experiment, and I'd love to be able to ask questions on the fly from people. So, okay, so like me, you integrate some of those non-occult disciplines, and then what are some of the quote unquote contemporary spiritual techniques that you apply to your magical practice while still respecting the integrity and the foundation of what you've learned that has come from the ancient resources?
As an example, I think the best example I can think of to that is in ceremonial magic, they have what they call casting the circle, where you have the circle with the four quarters, then you'll have a triangle outside of it. And I actually take that to one step farther and I create a full Merkaba with the two triangles, one pointing upwards, one pointing downwards, and then the circle in the center. And use that to call forth the 10 forces of the planetary forces that I work with. If I'm doing the Sumerian ritual, it would be the 10 planets that are associated with the Sumerian and the gods and goddesses. And that is one aspect that I find that only the Sumerian pantheon has. And I think the main reason why I was so drawn to them is because only the Sumerian pantheon, to my knowledge, has a god and a goddess archetype for every force they work with. It is created in complete harmony and complete balance. And that's something that I think has a tremendous amount of power.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, my own magical practice, I like to draw on a variety of different resources. So, and I do. Some people might call it "quote unquote" eclectic, and of course, we hear eclectic as a dirty word a lot of the time. But I will say that with my practice,
Every mage is eclectic.
yeah, well, there you go. I love that. Yeah. What I will say about that is that everything that I've done has been based on a foundation. I mean, as I point out with magical
Yeah,
experimentation, you can't experiment with magic until you learn the foundation and you actually understand what
yeah,
you're doing. And I think a lot of times people will get this idea of like, well, if I'm going to like be chaos magicians are a great example of this. Like, I'm just going to go and pull from these various systems and do some paradigmal piracy, but I don't fully understand what I'm doing, and then that ends up creating the very chaos, quote unquote, that they're trying
yeah.
to,
They're
you know,
practicing chaos magic, creating chaos, and then blaming the magic for the chaos.
yeah, without really looking at kind of with their own role in that. And of course, I mean, the magician is always an intimate part of this process. How much does
Whether
your
you recognize it or not, even throughout daily life, we create our reality by our beliefs, by our ideals, by our values, and by the things we give energy to. The ritual arts and the magical arts is simply an extension of that and being aware of that so that you utilize that as a conduit rather than being a unwilling participant.
Yeah, I want to speak to that, and I want to speak really to something that I think it is really kind of relevant to that. Today, I was exchanging voice notes with my beloved. It's a long distance relationship, and at one point, I shared something with her, and she called me in, and she's like, like you're calling in doubt and things like that. When you have this practice where you take all that and apply it and use it to actually help, she's like, do what you talk about, live it, and I loved it. I
Yeah.
mean, I loved that she called me in, and sometimes we need that. We need that kind of kind of focus and direction. In your own practice, do you work with other people? And how, if so, how do you work with other people? Do you have like somebody that you work with as a partner, or do you work with like a group of people, or are you solitary?
I'm primarily solitary. I do have a couple of people that I tutor and teach. Some of them are taking a much more esoteric approach to it, and I'm walking them through the rituals for doing the Ladder of Lights and the Sumerian initiation process and things like that. Um, some of them, it's just through helping them to understand themselves through a more spiritual perspective and a more esoteric perspective. I do work with others primarily remotely, utilizing tools of technology, phone and whatever, because I'm in the middle of nowhere, and that's by choice. I'm on 85 acres of land in Colorado that's about an hour from the New Mexico border, and it's incredible place to be. The universe just said, "Okay, here's where you're supposed to go. Get there." We'll provide the means. We'll get you there. Just trust us. And that's pretty much what I did. I mean, I was given the opportunity to move here, and I just put it out to the universe. Hey, I need a ride. I was in Chicago at the time, and someone that I did not know or talk to at all ever before contacted me and said, "Hey, I'm coming to pick you up to take you home, to take you to Colorado." I'm like, "Okay, sure. Yeah." I'd never spoken to this person before. Sure enough, they showed up at my door less than 24 hours later. They drove from Florida to Chicago for the sole purpose of picking me up and driving me back to Colorado.
Well, if that isn't
Just
magic, I don't know
because
what
they
is.
were told to do it.
Yeah, if I don't know if that isn't magic, I don't know what is, right?
Magic and living in alignment. I'm telling you right there. You want confirmation? There you go.
Yeah, no, it's true. Like when you live a magical life, you are living in alignment with those spiritual forces and with those beings, and you're mediating them and presenting them. And that's why it's so important to get clear on like the areas where you might feel doubts or fears or anything else, and just
Yeah.
surrender to it. surrender those so that it goes back to source and you're in connection with source. Now, again, before we continue on, I just want to note that we do have a few live people here. Thank you so much for being here. If you have questions, please feel free to
Hello.
drop a message in because I would love to ask those questions live. I'm going to continue on with the interview, but this is kind of an opportunity for you to actually comment on this as we're going through.
And we do have a topic in hand, but I'm open to going down the rabbit hole, whatever direction you want to go. I work on a regular basis with inner earth beings. I've been visited by the insectoid species on a regular basis. I've been to Agartha and Shambhala in the center of the earth. I work with the Watchers Council. My life is interesting. I'm not well paid, but I'm definitely very interesting life.
Well, there is something to be said for the fact that you can have a really interesting life and like actually have that richness and abundance right there. I mean, you're living the life you want to live.
Absolutely.
How many
Yes.
people
There
can
is
say
no
that?
job in the world that can provide me with the opportunities that are presented to me.
Yeah, I mean, how many people can really say that? Like, I'm in a similar space with you, where I'm like, I'm living the life I want to live, and
Yes.
choosing to manifest that life as opposed to working, at a job that I really don't like, that's soul sucking and takes away from things. And I've been at that job. I've been at that place. I know. I'm
I've
sure
been
you
there
have as
for
well.
25 years. I worked as a chef before I broke free.
Right. And so I kind of think that kind of brings us to a very interesting question, which is, for people who are kind of watching this, they might have this question, but I definitely do, which is, how do you get to that place where you're able to live that magical life? And what is it that you need to let go of in order that you can live that magical life? Because living the magical life, I think, at least for me and you, is definitely the goal.
Yeah. I think a lot of what we have to let go of is expectations.
Hmm.
In my case, when it's time to transition to a new reality, you'll be given signs. And in my case, my birth name is Kevin. I was working in a wood fired restaurant primarily because I'm a fire mage. If I have an opportunity to work somewhere where I can actually play with fire in a physical, tangible form and cook and be paid for it, that's a win situation. And so there was someone else that worked there that was going by the name Kevin. And so they asked me if there were any other names that I went by or any other names that anyone called me. And I'm like, well, some people call me the wizard. Still to this day, if I ever talk to anyone from that business, they still call me the wizard. No one ever calls me Kevin. And I ended up coaching the executive director, the vice president of the entire corporation on ceremonial magic. So when the universe comes into alignment, you will receive signs. They may be subtle. In my case, the universe doesn't really seem to understand subtle too well. But there will definitely be signs. A lot of it is just a leap of faith, a recognition and a knowing on a soul level that the 9 to 5 is not doing it anymore.
Yeah, that's what it was for me. I left my 9 to 5 at the end of August of 2024, and I was actually going to go back to school to get a degree in counseling.
Mm-hmm.
And within a few days of leaving that job, I came to a realization that no, I'm not going to do that. That's not the path I'm meant to walk. And part of it was I went to the ocean and I did a ritual to Eros and Aphrodite, and they're kind of like, "Well, what do you really want to do?" I'm like, "I want to continue to serve my magical community." And then I was like, and I want to do the men's work. Like, this is what I want to do. I want to help men become safer. And they're like, well, then if that's what you really want to do, then you need to be willing to let go of the expectations and everything else and buckle up. It's going to be a fun ride. And boy,
Yep.
it has been a fun ride. It's been an interesting experience. I've had to like literally just kind of let go and have that faith. And of course, still put myself out there. I think that's an important thing too. Like I'm still having to put myself out there. I'm still doing things. I'm still actively, putting myself out there into the world. It's not like I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to leave all things. Like if anything, magic is an active practice, and living a magical life
Yes.
is an active practice. It's not just okay. I'm just gonna go and sit around and wait for things to happen to me.
I'll
No, I'm
put on
gonna
my
go out
robe
there
on
and
the
do
full moon and we'll dance around the fire and I'll call myself a high mage.
it. Right.
That's witchcraft, folks. It's not high magic. And it's not even a good witch.
So I think that it's really important to recognize that we still have to put ourselves out there in whatever way we're doing it, and
Yes.
sometimes that's going to occur in
Even
ways
if
that we
it's
don't
through
expect.
social media and through opportunities like this, I don't say no to a podcast ever. If I have an opportunity to be interviewed live by someone, even if I know it's someone that doesn't trust me or doesn't want to hear what I have to say, even if I know it's someone that is intentionally trying to sabotage who I am, I'll still go on because I know who I am and I know my abilities. And I ain't worried about being confronted.
Well, clearly in this case, you didn't have to worry anyway.
No, but side note related to that, we talked briefly about groups recruiting me. One of those groups, of course, the most famous one of all, the Illuminati. In my case, Jacob Rothschild himself reached out and messaged me and said he wanted me to become a member of their group. And I told him the same thing I told everybody else that tried to recruit me. You're looking for me, I'm not looking for you. Goodbye.
Was
And
that
he
through
didn't like
Facebook?
that too much.
Was that through Facebook?
Yes.
Yeah, I've had that same person reach out to me, and I've just been kind of like, I was just like, no thanks, I'm not interested. It was like I
Yeah.
was like,
And
I
they
didn't even
had
know who
like
it was,
some
and
they had
is this
some
person?
pawn puppet that came in that threatened me. They're like, we will reveal the truth of who and what you are. I'm like, I'm a transparent fucking pane of glass. I hide nothing about who I am and what I do. Feel free to share. I call that publicity.
I just kind of was like, okay, whatever, and just kind of left it at that. So I thought it was a kind of a strange thing, but yeah.
The interesting thing was, though, they threatened to reveal who I was and threatened to destroy me. And Jacob Mortimer Rothschild died 2 weeks later on February 12th.
Well, there you go. You clearly didn't need to worry about it, did you?
Clearly was not a problem.
uh, well, whoever the Jacob Rothschild was that contacted me, this must have been after February 12th because this was like early or like late last year or something. So I don't know. Doesn't really much
Yeah,
matter. But I
that
think
wouldn't
it's
have
kind
been
of funny.
Jacob then, or at least not the real him. He still probably has people that work for him and keep the profile alive just because, well, you're a Rothschild. You're supposed to be immortal.
I guess so.
Money buys immortality, or at least that's the story they tell you for when you join the Illuminati. That's the recruiting speech.
Well, Rathi, I want to thank you for coming on here. And this is the first time I've done this live. So it was just kind of a fascinating exploration to do it. Um, today, what I want to do is I want to end on two questions. First question is, where can
Okay.
people find you on the web?
Okay. Sacred Sorcery, spelled SOURCERY.co.site. There's a email contact form on there as well, or a messenger form. There's also a link to my Substack. If you're watching this on Substack, I do have a Substack, so you can find me on there as well. If you want to, once this goes live, add to the comments, add a link to my profile on there. That's probably the best two ways because I don't really do Facebook or any of the other social media. The only social media I do anymore is just Substack because it's the only one that I've found that actually has, if not intelligent people, at least inquisitive people that are willing to explore and think. And in today's world, finding a group of 5 people that can think is a rarity.
Okay, and the final thing I want to ask you is what is your final word of wisdom that you can share with us that we can take with us into our day moving forward? This is a question I ask every time at the end of my podcast.
Let go of expectations.
All right.
anytime you have a specific targeted objective in mind, you're limiting yourself from every other potential. So you are limiting yourself from things that could even be far greater than you could ever imagine by just looking at one specific thing. For example, if you're looking to buy a car and you have a specific make and model in mind, you may have something that would be far better for your needs, maybe even more affordable or whatever, that you never thought about. And because of how tunnel vision you have, you would never recognize it or see it until possibly it's too late.
I hear that. And I agree with that. I think it's true. I mean, it's important to define, I think, define your result, but not get so defined that you get lost in the weeds.
And don't worry about how you get there. You've got A as your starting point. You've got C, D, E, F, G, Z, or whatever as your finishing point. Who knows how many detours between? And be concrete about your desired results, but be flexible at the same time.
Yeah. Yep, that's true. I mean, because magic works best when we allow for the variability and the mystery. That's definitely been my experience. So,
Exactly.
well, I want to thank you for coming on the show today and also for indulging me by being willing to run a little experiment by going live on Substack. And I've really enjoyed this. And for those of you who are live, thank you for being here. And the rest of you will probably end up seeing this episode come out actually in a couple of weeks because that's normally when I do these every other week. But we will be promoting it before then. So thank you all so much and have an excellent day. Take care.